A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Malaysian Invention and Design Society, or MINDS, for this opportunity to speak at the National Conference on contributions to national development by Malaysian women scientists in conjunction with the International Women's Day 2021. It is indeed a great privilege to be a part of this event. Now, Malaysia is certainly not short of women role models. These are only a segment of the many inspiring and amazing Malaysian women scientists, from an astrophysicist whose work has pioneered Malaysia's participation in space exploration to a president of the International AIDS Society, which is the world's largest association of HIV/AIDS professionals with 11,600 members from over 170 countries. So we rejoice together in celebrating the International Women's Day. So back to our topic on worms. This might be our earliest recollection of how a worm looks like, an earthworm or garden worm or cacing tanah, as our local language calls it. But in our gut or intestine, they look somewhat different. There's no segments and sometimes somewhat familiar. Now, there are some worms that look like trichuris, or it's a trichuris, and it looks like a whip. Whilst other worms, such as the hookworm, reminds you of the movie Jaws, a 1975 American thriller film directed by Steven Spielberg. So why do I say that worms are our ancient foes? Now, this is because the gut worms have been described more than 2,500 years ago in the writings of Hippocrates, the earliest Greek medical texts. In 2017, scientists discovered the first archaeological evidence of worms infecting ancient inhabitants from feces collected from prehistoric burials. And this revelation provides concrete evidence that humans have co-evolved with worms for thousands of years. Now, gut worms are parasites. And parasites are organisms that live in or on another host or another species. And they depend on the host for survival, obtaining shelter, and nutrition. Now, the worms usually do not kill the host for fear of their own survival. So hence, gut worms have learned to co-evolve together with their human hosts over several 100 million years. Now, this is to ensure that they can survive and they develop mechanisms to suppress the severity of diseases. So they do this by immunoregulation to survive inside human hosts for years. Now, there are three common gut worms: Trichuris trichura, or we call it the whipworm, Ascaris lumbricoides, or the roundworm, and Neceta americanus, or Encyclostoma duodenale, the hookworms. Now, these worms produce a wide range of symptoms, including diarrhea, abdominal pain, general malaise, as well as weakness. But in some cases, especially in heavy and chronic infections, patients may experience intestinal obstruction, rectal prolapse, as well as anemia, or a patient may look pale or paler. In heavy infections and in long-term or chronic infections, these may lead to complications of malnutrition, malnutrition deficiencies, impaired learning or school performance, reduced work capacity, and eventually it results to poor economic productivity. So we know that gut worms are bad. However, worms may not be bad all the time. There are two sides of the coin, so let me walk you through this debate of good and evil. Now, in the human gut, we know that worms do not live alone. And in the gut, they cohabitate with worms and many other organisms. And what are these organisms? So in the gut, there are also what we call as the gut microbiota. The gut microbiota consists of bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, and viruses. And they reside in the gut together with these worms. Now, for the benefit of this talk, when I mention gut microbiota, I'll be referring mainly to the gut bacteria. And this gut bacteria play critical roles in regulating innate and adaptive human hemostasis or immune hemostasis. Now, there are approximately 100 trillion bacteria in our gut, and they are important to human health. These good bacteria inhibit the growth of bad bacteria, metabolize food, and maintain the gut mucosa integrity. So since both worms and bacteria live in the gut, they must communicate. It was hypothesized that worms regulate our immune system by influencing the gut bacteria through mutualistic and synergistic partnerships. So given the lack of information on how the presence of worms influence the gut microbiota, in this case bacteria, in human studies, our team embarked on a project in 2012 to compare the gut microbiota of individuals infected with worms versus those who were not infected with worms. And in our study, we found that among the indigenous individuals, a majority, which is 36 out of 51 fecal samples, contained Trichuris worms. And Trichuris was the most common, followed by Ascaris and hookworm. Now, we also saw that these are the gut microbial diversity or composition among those that had worm infections versus those without worm infection. So what was interesting was that we observed that those infected with worms have increased gut microbial or gut bacteria diversity. Now, greater diversity is good, and here's the analogy. Now, when there are garden worms in our soil, our garden will thrive with many types of plants and flowers. Similarly, with the presence of the gut worms, they will help the gut bacteria to thrive, increasing the diversity that will ensure a healthier gut and overall health. But when there is no worms, the diversity of gut bacteria decreases and may cause imbalance to the gut health. So our findings provided concrete evidence that the gut worms increase gut bacteria diversity. So what is the significance of this association? How can this be applied? Can this association be used to treat certain diseases? Or are we crazy to think of this possibility? Actually not. It is not a crazy idea because large-scale epidemiological studies have shown that there is an inverse association between worm infections and autoimmune disorders. That in areas where worm infections are high, autoimmune disorders are low. So is this a coincidence, or do worm infections have protective effect on certain diseases? So we are very intrigued with this observation, and we wanted to unravel this mystery. We wanted to find out whether worms have therapeutic role in the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease or IBD. So 3 of us, myself here, Heng and Kent, both of them at that time, they were from the New York University. We came together to conduct a very interesting study. So we had to do so many experiments to test our hypothesis, but finally our results paid off, and our results were accepted for publication in the prestigious Science Journal in 2016. So let me tell you briefly what we did. Now, Kent developed a mouse model of Crohn's disease. The mice deficient in NOT2 gene developed intestinal abnormalities of the global cells, which resulted in a compromised mucus layer. And this increased the proliferation of gut microbiota, which we call the Bacteroides vulgaris, a type of bed bacteria. So when worm infection was introduced to the NOT2 mice, it was discovered that the worm Trichuris muris infection restored small intestinal globule cell numbers, and the morphology in turn improves the mucus layer. So the worm infection reversed the intestinal abnormalities that were found in the NOT2 mice. So in addition, the worm infection prevented the intestinal bleeding and perforation, exaggerated weight loss, mucus depletion, as well as reduced specific pathologies such as abscesses, epithelial hyperplasia, villus blunting, and immune infiltrates. Now, what was significant was that following worm infection, there was inhibition of Bacteroides vulgaris, or the bad bacteria, and this led to the eventual proliferation of Clostridiales, which is the good bacteria, through ecological competition. We also found that the expansion of Clostridiales was associated with interleukin 13 and 4. Now, as all the above happened in the animal model, we wanted to know whether this happens in humans too. So what we did was, since we couldn't introduce worms into humans because this will not be ethical, we decided to do the other way around. We identified individuals with worm infections, analyzed their gut microbiota, then we dewormed them and analyzed their gut microbiota after deworming again. And then we compared the gut microbiota profiles. Now, using bioinformatic analysis, we found that the gut microbiota in the pre-treatment samples were more diverse than the ones in the post-treatment. So this confirms our earlier findings that worm infections are associated with greater microbial diversity. The next slide shows us another analysis of the pre-treatment samples, which were more diverse than the post-treatment samples. Now, in the nutshell, the same benefit which we observed in the animal model was then seen in humans as well. So let me summarize this in this diagram. When Trichuris worm infect an animal or humans, this worm altered the composition of gut microbiota. So how they do this? By triggering the immune system to increase mucus production. These in turn will produce a conducive environment for the good bacteria to thrive, and thus reduce the growth of bad bacteria via ecological competition. And this results in the reduction of IBD symptoms. So in the nutshell, there is a synergistic effect between worms, immune system, and the gut microbiota. But is worm therapy palatable? I think many of us will cringe at that thought, and many will be disgusted. So we need to find proxies or surrogates. And the surrogates can come in the form of probiotic or drink of probiotics which contain good bacteria. Now, we have a lot more work to do to explore the use of worm infections as a treatment for other inflammatory diseases, cancer, HIV, etc. So recently, we were granted the US NIH grant from 2018 to 2022 to further understand this mystery. And in 2019, that was quite recent, we also discovered the interplay between worms, micronutrients, and the microbiota on the regulation of immune responses in humans. So, will worms be our magic bullet or our panacea? It may not be too far-fetched, though, ladies and gentlemen, as I've presented above, and there have been evidences of both in human and animal model to show that worms might be protective against allergy-related diseases, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and even diabetes. So I'm working now with collaborators such as Dr. Peng Lok in US NIH, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, where Dr. Anthony Fauci is the director. And we are looking to unravel these mysteries even further. I'm also collaborating with Professor Dr. Eric Elms from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, to look into the establishment of the World Gut Microbiota databases. Now, the moral of the story is that worms may not be that bad after all, and we must not judge a book by its cover. So low doses of worms can do us good, but the high doses of worms may be detrimental. So ladies and gentlemen, before I end, I'd like to encourage all the ladies out there to go after your dreams, to think big, to dream big. As a person, we wear many hats. We play many roles. We may be a wife, a mother, a daughter, a teacher, a lecturer, a scientist. But there is nothing to stop us from reaching the stars. The opportunities are there for us to seize, but there are 4 important ingredients that are crucial to succeed, and they are curiosity, perseverance, humility, and respect. And with these words, I'd like to rest my case, and I thank you for your kind attention. Good day, everyone.